So welcome everyone again to this discussion. If you've just joined us, if you could please introduce yourself in the chat. So you'll see at the bottom of the screen in the middle, there's a chat icon. If you can introduce yourself with your name, organization and country, that would be great. And thanks to those of you who have already. This is where the discussion will take place today. So do make sure you stay muted and keep your video off unless you're presenting. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's second discussion from the Chemicals Network run by the University of Cape Town in South Africa, as well as supported and funded by the Swedish chemical agency Chemi. And if you're having any technical issues, you'll see on the screen that there's a WhatsApp group that you can go to, and Eunice from the University of Cape Town will assist you. For those of you who are new, just a reminder that the UCT's Chemical Network Discussion Forum is a community of practice where we bring together representatives from different regions, sectors, and stakeholder groups to really foster a mutually supporting consortium of stakeholders where we discuss different issues related to chemicals. And today we're very fortunate to have a presenter from Chemi who will be speaking to us about the transfer of information in connection with the import of chemicals and its implication on classification and labeling, which is very important. So within this community of practice, we hope to build the capacity of regulators, researchers, NGOs, and others, particularly in low and middle income countries. And we hope to achieve this through learning from each other. And that's why this is not a webinar, but more of a discussion which will take place in the chat room where you've been introducing yourselves. We also will share information and data with each other and hope to identify gaps and problem solve collectively. And really, the goal is to reduce and prevent chemical poisonings and environmental contamination with a view to a toxic-free future for the next generation. It's a nonpartisan group, so we might not agree with everyone's viewpoint, but we will respect each other. When you respond in the chat to a question or ask a question, it always helps if you can put your country or organization. And we do ask you to engage with each other, to respond to each other as well. So I will shortly introduce our esteemed speaker for today, and then we will have 3 questions that she will lead us into, and then we'll go into the chat. If you've just joined us, please do continue to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, organization, and country. It really helps us to learn who we are. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Gunilla Prideaux, who is from the Swedish chemicals agency, Chemi, where she's working currently as a strategic advisor as part of the international unit. She has immense experience from working at the agency in various areas, such as pesticide regulation, government assignments, and the National Environmental Quality Objective, which is a non-toxic environment. So Gunilla, you are most welcome. Thank you for giving of your time for us today for this important topic, and I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you for being invited to this forum. So I will talk today about the transfer of information in connection with import of chemicals and its implications on classification and labeling of chemicals. So I can have the first picture, the first slide, please. So the implementation of GHS, globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, is still progressing very slowly globally. It is clear that increasing the political will to implement GHS is an important prerequisite. The major exporting countries are key players, as their decisions influence many other countries with which they trade. So influencing the political will can be difficult and time-consuming, but there are some paths that are interesting to explore further. So we asked ourselves here at KEMI, how can we continue to contribute to this and in which way? So during 2020, KEMI carried out an analysis based on experiences from previous collaborative activities, focusing on GHAs over the years, mainly linked to KEMI's support to countries that intend to implement the system. And the analysis was also based on a literature study and the results of 2 consultant studies. From that on, an internal strategy was developed, and starting in 2021, a number of activities have been conducted with the aim of both analyzing barriers and challenges for countries wishing to implement GHS nationally, and also to promote the implementation of GHS globally. And you can see some of those activities here on the slide. We have performed a study on the role of national substance classification lists in the implementation of GHS. We have made a study on the role of international trade agreements for the implementation of GHS, and this study is published on our website. We have performed an analysis or a survey of transfer of information in connection with import of chemicals. That is the topic of today. We have made an analysis of GHS implementation in the ASEAN, in Association of Southeast Asian Nations region. And we've also continued working with guidance and training on GHS. So this is basically what we've been doing the past 2 years to develop our work with, to help to implement GHS globally. So we can have the next slide, please. And just to remind ourselves what we're talking about, it's almost 30 years ago that the mandate to create a globally harmonized hazard classification and labeling system was adopted at the UN Conference on Environment and Development. And the purpose was to enhance the protection of human health and the environment by providing an internationally comprehensible system for hazard communication, provide a legal framework for countries without an existing system, reduce the need for testing and evaluation of chemicals, and also to facilitate international trade in chemicals whose hazards have been properly assessed and identified on an international basis. So this was agreed upon 30 years ago. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, one of the activities in our strategy was to try to get a better understanding on how much and what type of information regarding chemical content and hazard information that is transferred when a country is importing chemicals. How does it work in practice? What are the challenges and opportunities? So the outcome of the survey would hopefully shed some light on what challenges there are and what can make GHS operational in a country which has already implemented GHS. And based on our knowledge on international implementation of GHS, as well as the contacts we have already with many agencies, we selected 3 countries for the survey. That is Sweden, Zambia, and Vietnam. And with those, with representatives from those countries, we have had interviews, and this was last year, in 2021. So, okay, we can have the next slide. So what we found was that there were some similarities. Responsibilities for classification and labeling can vary between countries, where some put the full responsibility on importers, producers, and suppliers, and some put more responsibility on the government through licensing systems, where classification and labeling is approved by the responsible agency. And today we're interested in your experiences from import of chemicals and to discuss possible challenges related to the transfer of information on physical health and environmental hazards in order to ensure that the chemicals can be correctly classified and labeled. So the discussion today is a bit broader than our study, which focused on the implementation of GHS. Today, we also include those who have not yet implemented GHS in national legislation, and how does it work with information transfer. Okay, we can have the next slide. So how does it work in your countries today? Is the information you receive when chemicals are imported to your country, or when you're a company importing chemicals, is the information fulfilling the national requirements? And how do you deal with any lack of information in your country or in your company when you are importing?
Thank you, Gunilla, for taking us through that introduction to this question. And I now encourage everyone to move into the chat to address the question that has been presented to you. But also, if Gunilla raised any issues while she did the introduction, if you have questions for her, please post those also in the chat. We will have some poll questions as well shortly. But I do think this is a really important issue when I think about South Africa. You know, how do you actually get the information in order to fulfill the legislation, and particularly countries that are thinking of promulgating or have promulgated GHS. So we'll see you in the chat room. Gunilla, you're welcome to stay on if you'd like. You can verbally respond to the comments that you see in the chat. It's a bit much for you to type and read them. So you're welcome to continue speaking.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so we are really curious about to have some examples on how this works and how this information transfer is working in practice. Okay. So by who you mean if it's an authority or company, or it's a person, special person in the within the company or within the authority? Okay, so in Zambia, different agencies have different roles to play in the process. Does that work well? Yes, resources are important. Hmm. True. Like legislation plays a part. Different ministries that get different information. Okay. Uh, so what happens when the request is rejected? Do they come back with more information in Botswana? Hmm. Hmm. So in Tanzania, how do you deal with the lack of transparency there? Hmm.
So you'll note that we have now posted a poll question for you. If you'd like to respond to it, the link to menti.com is in the chat. You can just click on it and it'll take you straight to it. Or you can, of course, go to menti.com and put in the code that's on the screen. You can choose more than one response. So which of the following information is provided by the company importing chemicals as part of an application for import or at the time of inspection? And thank you for those of you who continue to post in the chat.
Hmm.
So do continue to respond to question 1 in the chat, as well as voting on the poll. And if you have just recently joined us, do please introduce yourself with your name, organization, and country. Thank you.
Andrea, I see your question there about the SDSs and MSDSs as being the source of information provided by the industry. Is there a time frame or how often these need to be updated? Well, this should be, of course, if something is changed, if new information arises, the company, of course, should update their information accordingly, as if it's a mixture or any other new information from the company. They should update their information. But also maybe if this is connected to a licensing system in the country that is importing, maybe there should be a time frame on the license so that the authority could have some opportunity to ask for an updated version of the information provided by the companies, as with often, for instance, is the case with pesticides. Is that something about that you were thinking about? Something like that? There should be some possibility to ask for new information, or maybe have some kind of sense of when well, this is kind of the issue of where you put the responsibility on who should keep track on which information. That should be, I think, in the legislation. Mm-hmm. Where do you put the responsibility to know that there is new information?
Sorry, I was busy typing. Gunilla, do you want to make any comments about the response to the poll before we move on to question 2? You can see 16 people have responded, and so perhaps you'd like to comment on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. It's very interesting to check this out. Notably, there are very similar information provided on most of these areas, apart from the environmental hazard, which is about half as many who receive information about this. Yeah, that's what we can see here, right? So the environmental hazard data is more scarce than the rest of the information about the chemicals. Concerning the terrestrial organisms, sorry, now I see. We have the aquatic organisms, but not the terrestrial. That's so, and we have, 33 participants who have answered, who are here, and about 15 at the most who have answered one of these. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That is, I mean, that is a telling picture of what information is available. You know, it's one thing when people comment and say they do have access to the information, but when you break it down in terms of what type of information, it's a different picture. Yeah. So I think we've had a very lively discussion for question 1, and thank you for taking us through that. Participants can continue to respond to any issues as well as the poll, but we'll move on to question 2. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So, although these 3 countries that we chose to interview in our attempt to get a better understanding on what we're now discussing and talking about, what information is transferred when chemicals are being exported and imported, even though these countries are situated in different regions, it seems that there are some similarities in which countries these chemicals are imported from. And also, we know that the amount of information available for classification and labeling varies depending on issues such as exporting country, what type of chemical it is, and what type and size of supplying company we're talking about. Okay, so we can have the next picture. Next slide, please. So this is just to show, and I'm sure you have seen some similar numbers or illustrations before. This is just to illustrate where the chemicals of today are being produced, and this is in numbers are in sales in euros from 2019, and it's CEFIC, the European Chemical Industry Council, that have provided these numbers. So we can see here which countries are the large producers of chemicals globally, and we see that the production of chemicals around the world is steadily increasing, and the number of chemical substances in commercial use is increasing, as are the volumes sold. And an estimate is that the production capacity of global chemical industry doubled between 2000 and 2017. And it has also shifted chemical production from the EU and the region of USA, Canada, and Mexico towards Asia. And yes, and we can have the next slide, please. And the question of CBI, confidential business information, came up in the chat earlier. And one finding when we went in our interviews with the Zambia, Vietnamese, Swedish authorities was that suppliers of chemicals, that is exporting companies, are sometimes not confident to provide certain information, and that this creates problems both for the importing companies and the authorities. And there can be various problems, like, for instance, if there are small importing companies dealing with large exporting companies, could be a problem. And for the licensing process and for the labeling, of course, this could be a problem when the exporting company is referring to CBI, confidential business information. So quickly, we are landing in question 2. Is the chemical information provided understandable and usable? Are certain suppliers or exporting countries or types of chemicals more problematic than others? And how come?
Thanks, Gunilla, and thank you for the important question that you have posed. I mean, we've been touching on it a bit in the first question. Are people actually trained to use the information? Do they know how to interpret it, which I think is very important. And I think there's also quite a difference in countries between pesticides and industrial chemicals. So it would be good for participants also to tease that out in responding to this question. See you in the chat.
No.
Is the information always provided in a language that can be understood in the country? We have wondered. Yes. Yes, I would say that the SDSs are for professional use.
So we have another poll question that's been posted. Although the countries look very small, when you actually go into Mentimeter by clicking on the link in the chat or going to menti.com and putting the code in that's at the top of the screen, you will be able to read the countries. So the question is, which countries are the main suppliers or exporters of chemicals to your country? And you can choose as many as are applicable. Thanks. If you have clicked on other, For the Menti poll, please do list them. I see, thank you. I see Israel has been added. Thanks. Please do continue to respond to question 2, where we're looking at whether the chemical information provided is understandable and usable in the chat. Mm-hmm. Gunilla, would you say the information available in the EU is adequate?
Yes, I would say so, but there are, I think that there are still difficulties, could be difficulties sometimes getting the proper information. There's always need for inspections of the information provided, but we have, especially with pesticides, a lot of data requirements and information that needs to be provided, and also with the REACH. But we are trying to expand the data information that we wish to have. But Sweden is a small, Sweden in itself is a small country and a small market. So I think that maybe sometimes small companies, and I also know that invites, for instance, information that is needed for instance, eco-labeling and so on, can sometimes be difficult to get from exporting countries. as a similar. Mm. Andrea, you asked, are the studies with toxicity data submitted to the EU evaluated for the scientific rigor? How do you say rigor? Definitely for the pesticides, which are evaluated and approved, each substance, and also the other substances in the products. And it's a different system, as you know, with other chemicals, but the data that is submitted is evaluated when it's used for decision making, I should say. Whenever there's a decision making process, if it's for harmonized classification, or if it's approval of pesticides, or if it is some decision making process within REACH or any other legislation, then the toxicity data is evaluated. I'm not sure I understand your question, Andrea. Does the EU accept studies that may have a conflict of interest?
Sorry, I'll just find my microphone. I'll take liberty. So some studies have been funded by the industry. Many are funded by the industry, but sometimes there's a conflict of interest in relation to, for example, academic scientists who've been funded by the industry, and it could possibly at times skew the data and the results. So I'm just wondering if there's a policy on the type of studies that are accepted, or if these studies are scrutinized in terms of the methodology that's been used to show whether that it's a sound and good scientific methodology. I know it's a big question. I'm not sure if you can answer it, but I'm just raising it.
I'm just thinking out of my experience, since I mostly work with pesticides, and mostly I think the studies that we rely upon are based on the OECD guidelines, and basically in all legislation. But I don't know how much information we take in, say, from monitoring studies and other research, but I think that is more rare than practice, I would say. I will. It is a discussion, though, here. From time to time, this is a bigger discussion that there are other studies and how to use them. And also sometimes we feel that there is a frustration, say, within the scientific, in the academia, that that the academia is producing results and facts that are not used enough for regulating purposes. So it is a valid question, for sure. Yes, we did. We did see some action with glyphosate.
Perhaps you'd like to comment on the poll, Vanilla, what you're
Yes,
seeing and
yes,
what
I'm
that's saying to you.
Well, I think it is confirming a bit what we saw on the map, on the numbers of the volumes produced in the world. China and India, large exporters or suppliers of chemicals. Also Germany, South Africa, of course, and the US. We see nothing from Russia right now, although it was earlier in our, when we asked questions earlier and looked at what it in Sweden also. In last year, Russia was an exporter, but maybe not now for obvious reasons. And also Israel came up as another country outside the ones that we have already listed. And Brazil is also a large exporter. This is interesting. It shows that there are certain countries that are definitely supplying the rest of the world with chemicals. I see that there are still answers in the chat. Question?
Yes, so perhaps while people continue discussing those, we can go ahead and move on to our final question, since it is top of the hour now. So I suggest we move on to question 3. Thanks.
Thank you. So there may be different ways to improve information provisions and thereby enable correct classification and labeling of chemicals. And how do we find these? A legal framework that also defines roles and responsibilities is a fundamental starting point. Who is going to provide who with information? And cooperation between different authorities or governmental departments, such as customs and border control, authorities responsible for registration of chemicals, occupational safety, as well as local authorities. This also came up already in the discussion before. But also creating awareness and demand and increased knowledge among professional users as well as consumers about the possibilities to demand and receive information. Within the EU, we have a provision under REACH that you can ask for certain information within certain timeframes if you are a consumer, if, for instance, treated articles with dangerous substances. So that's the way also to increase the demand. I can have the next slide, please. We have also talked a little bit about this, the difference between the labels and the safety data sheets. So the labels give very brief information to private consumers and professional users of the hazards of a chemical and also on precautions if there is an accident, for instance. And the safety data sheets give more detailed information to professional users of the chemicals, such as information about personal protection equipment, first aid measures, safe storage, and how to take care of spills. This was also a question already in the chat before. Yes. And the ultimate purpose of the globally harmonized system is the safe use of chemicals, both by professional users and the general public. You can have the next slide. So if we want to have a more information out there, what more than a correct classification and labeling of chemicals is needed to reach the goal of reduced risk when handling products for professional use and also for non-professional use? Which drivers are the most important for classification and labeling, do you think?
Thank you. Again, trying to find my mute. So thank you. Yes, you've raised some important questions. And so again, in the chat, we invite everyone to discuss these questions, but also to ask questions and perhaps to come up with some solutions. I mean, I think quite a lot of issues and problematic aspects have been raised, but how do we address those as well as we go forward with countries promulgating the GHS, etc.? So I think this is also an opportunity to look for some solutions. See you in the chat. Pernilla, are you able to comment on the point that Suresh from Guyana raises, where he says, that the SDS, the safety data sheet with the 16 elements as per the GHS, is good, but many companies are just putting non-applicable rather than the data. Is that something that would need to then be in legislation, that this information needs to be provided, or how is that dealt with in the EU? Thanks.
Yeah, that could be in the legislation, but together with the legislation is also the enforcement. So it's important to check on the SDSs that they are correct and that they are comply with the legislation that is in the country. And this is, I guess, some of the things that we were trying to address in the earlier questions with the CBI, or this is also what we have seen in this problem here, that in the interviews that we have made earlier, that sometimes it is bigger companies, bigger countries, they don't supply all the information to smaller companies or smaller countries. They don't share that information if they have it. I don't know if that was a good answer, but it was a try. It was an attempt.
Thank you. Yes, I think it is an issue that needs to continue to be discussed, and it's important to note how important legislation is, and that countries need to require that information.
Yes, and I would just like to say once again that we are investigating this field. We don't have the answers of all these or the solutions to all these things that are being discussed here. So we are also very, very curious about to just get the information on how things are and how things work in different countries.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So we have our last poll for today on the screen, and I must apologize for the artwork that seems to be appearing on the screen. I'm assuming it's not only my screen that's getting blue and yellow lines, so apologies for that. You should still be able to read the question. According to you, what measures would facilitate correct classification and labeling of chemicals? And there are several selections, and you may choose as many as you like. And thank you for those who are already voting. Again, you just go to the chat and you can click on the Menti link that's in the chat and you'll be able to respond. If you've been responding already, you can click on next question and it'll pop it up for you. Thanks. Also, you can continue addressing question 3 in the chat.
Yes, Andrea, you asked about training of the public how Sweden trains the public. I don't know if we train them, but we have an information on the website that guides every private people on how to through a house. It's called, I think, Hannah's house, and you can walk through the house and see where all the dangers are and how you should the potential chemical exposures and how you can deal with them and prevent them. We have also recently worked with a foundation that has made material for schools and preschools that can be used so to teach young people about chemicals and chemical hazard and chemical exposure, and also some radio programs we have worked with recently. And I think we are also moving ahead with trying to make more films and so on. We are not really big on social media for the public yet, but maybe that will come. Let's see if I can find Hannah's house. We'll put the link to Hannah's house here in the chat, but I think we only have it in Swedish, but you will get an idea of what it looks like, I think, anyway. You can just click around and see what it looks like, just to get an idea of what it is. Another, I don't know if another training of the public is the word, but I think that also some of the policies that we have in Sweden, we've had the same ones for a very long time, like the national objectives, environmental quality objectives. They have been here now for more than 20 years or so. And of course, when people grow up with politicians talking about these issues, it becomes a public awareness that also politically, I think.
So I don't know if you want to speak a bit to the poll and the responses that you're seeing, and also what some of the implications are. You know, for example, the strengthening the cooperation seems a bit lower, or placing the responsibility for classification on the industry. So perhaps interpreting some of that a bit as well. Thank you.
Well, to begin with, let me just look at them. We see that strengthening here in the poll, that's strengthening enforcement at border control is high, and also training of governmental staff and training of industry. And then second comes strengthening enforcement of inspections of workplaces and retailers, that is market surveillance, and including requirements on GHS in regional trade agreements. That is something that is quite interesting. That is something that we have been looking at ourselves and been asking ourselves that question and trying to investigate whether that is a way forward. But when it comes to placing the responsibility for classification and labeling of chemicals on industry, we believe here, and that's our experience also, that this is very important, also because this is such a huge task, if not put on the industry for governmental authorities. It's the resources for doing this is so big that it's it's almost impossible. So if you want to have the resources for inspections and enforcement and all the other governmental responsibilities and tasks that you need to do, it's our belief that you need to place the responsibility for classification and labeling of chemicals on the industry, and make that clear, so that the governmental authorities can focus on the inspections and the enforcement. That is our experience here. Regarding the others, regional international list with classifications of substances, that is also something that we have looked at some, and strengthening cooperation between governmental institutions and ministries. I think that is important, because this classification and labeling is divided between various fields, as with the agriculture, work safety, and trade, and there are many interests in this field, and many uses of the classification and labeling. So it's very important to cooperate between the various institutions and ministries, I believe. I don't know, Andrea, something else that I should comment on that I have missed?
No, I think it's good, the point that you made, because obviously you put the selection choices for a reason, and it's interesting seeing the lower percentages on some of them, whereby these are things that actually the EU or Sweden are thinking about. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for the members of this discussion to see what some of the issues are that are being discussed and why, and perhaps things that they hadn't thought about. You know, like defining confidential business information in legislation can be very problematic, as mentioned in the discussion, for health professionals and first responders and others. And so how do you make access to that information in order to save lives is something perhaps that hasn't been discussed for some people, although we have been having this discussion with Kemi through this platform, which has been most useful. And I encourage members, we do post all the digests from the discussions on the internet. So if you want to go back to other discussions and see how we've discussed them or the resources, please do visit our site, which has been put for you in the chat. So unless there's anything else that you would like to conclude with, Gunilla, I'll close the session shortly. Is there any other last comments you'd like to make?
Well, I would like to say that we have also started working more on our, together with the customs and strengthening our border controls for various reasons. And we think that is also very important for us, more now than it used to be.
A very good point, and perhaps a topic for another discussion. Thank you.
Yes.
So firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time. I know you've taken quite a lot of time out of your schedule to prepare for this discussion, the questions and the polls. So we appreciate that. We appreciate also your support team from Kemi who've been assisting you and also the Kemi support that we have. I'd like to thank all the participants for taking out your time and also for responding. And I hope you have gained some information that will help you move forward a bit in your work in reducing the risks from exposures to chemicals. I think there's an evaluation poll that will be posted for you to complete. If you're not registered for our chemical network, please do. Eunice has been posting it in the chat. And thank you to Eunice for all her hard work, despite having internet and connectivity issues. Thanks for that. As I mentioned, we do a digest summary of this discussion. So if you've signed up for the network, you will receive it. And we encourage you to share that with your colleagues who perhaps were unable to join us with today's session. And then just lastly, please put in your diaries our next discussion, which will be on the 7th of June, looking at circular economy in relationship to chemicals. So please join us then. In the meantime, stay safe. Thank you and goodbye for now.